So we're talking about Kabbalah and mysticism today. And the thing about Kabbalah, I mean, I'm sure this is not going to be much of a surprise, is that it seems like it's an entirely non-rationalistic way of looking at the world. It's looking at the world in sense of in a much more interpretive way than in a way of trying to analyze things according to facts and figures and conclusions. It doesn't mean that it's like entirely non-rational. In fact, some of the more um, yeastless, uh, square uh, minds of Jewish law were in fact very strong Kabbalists. Um, it's not that it's an entirely irrational way of looking at things. It's simply starting from different assumptions on how we look at the world. Um, Science can be like that too. And in fact, we're going to talk a lot about science today. Actually, one of the first slides I was going to show was Schrodinger's wave equation, just to make sure that you were all absolutely put off by what was going on and wondering if you were in the wrong class, because I don't understand it either. But it certainly is a very interesting thing to see, and wondering, how there's not a single number in it. It's only like Greek letters. But science is also the kind of thing where the people who are really in top notch in the science are people who are really bridging the gap between figuring, computing, and understanding what exactly all these numbers and ideas are trying to tell us about our world. Isaac Newton, for instance, like 20% of his writing was on science. 80% of his writing was on the Beit HaMikdash, on the temple, and how the temple was a model for the human body, how it was a model for the structure of the universe. We don't normally associate those things with Sir Isaac Newton, but he was a person who, again, was interested in not just figuring out what these things were, what the formula were to describe nature, but what these things actually mean to us as human beings. I'd like to start actually with a little Devar Torah that I learned on Hanukkah, because I think is really apropos to what we're talking about today. The idea about Hanukkah really is the idea of nes, of miracle. And what is miracle? According to one of the commentators called Sfat Emet, a miracle is a aspect of renewal in nature. He says that nature is something which is connected not just with our world as we see it, but but is connected to things that are higher up. And the problem that we have with the Greeks is that we were so deeply into Greek culture, and Greek culture was a culture which looked at nature as something which was virtually mechanical. And in fact, that's not so different from how a lot of people look at the universe nowadays also, as if the universe is like just one huge machine that keeps on grinding on, whether we're here or whether we're not here. And what Hanukkah and what that does, the kind of way of looking at the world as a machine, is that it takes away wonderment. It takes away the aspect of the world which is new, which can renew itself, which renews itself every day, which is renewed inside of ourselves every day. The idea of nature as a machine is something which the Greeks kind of gave us, and which has become a popular way of looking at the world. But the idea of Hanukkah is to bring us back to the idea of looking at the world in terms of wonder, of things that do change, of things that are maybe unpredictable, of things that are wondrous, and those aspects of wonderment are all around us. Things like beauty, things like love, things like colors. Right? Are colors absolutely necessary to a world? Things like flavors. I mean, all food really could be as tasteless and nourishing as tofu. All right. Sorry if you like tofu, but that's the way tofu is. All right. But instead we have all these different flavors and textures and smells that one has to wonder, are they absolutely necessary from the standpoint of Darwin? The same thing goes with animals, with flora and fauna, with the entire world, with sunsets, and we had an amazing sunset tonight. Are all these things like necessary from a standpoint of absolute necessity of the world, or are they things that are there that that respond to our senses, that that give us pleasure, that help us to transcend mundane life and get perceptions of the world that are more than just things that are scientific, mechanical, straight-edged, and sharp-cornered. And Kabbalists see all this different variety in the world, and to them, it's like it's a religious experience. You can say like the basis of pleasure, the basis of joy in the world for the Kabbalists is Shabbat. Now, Shabbat is a way of joining together the aspects of our physical and spiritual being to create a joy we call Oneg Shabbat, which transcends anything that we really have here on earth. They say it's like a taste of Olam Haba, of the next world, but it's someplace else in the Talmud that says better 10 seconds in this world than all of the next world combined, because this world is so suited to our senses of touch and taste and smell and sight. And these are not shallow things, right? These things are very, very deep, and the Kabbalist takes them very deeply. And what the Kabbalist can do, what the role of the Kabbalist is, in a sense, okay, is behind all of this variety that we have in our world, the Kabbalist is there to find the unity behind it all. That all these things are an expression of a oneness. And that's hard for us to see because we get caught up in all the variety of the world and have a hard time seeing the oneness behind it. But like the most important thing that we say in Judaism is what? What's the most important line we have in Judaism that really wraps up what Judaism is all about? 5 points. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Everything that we have in front of us, all those physical things that we have in front of us are in fact a manifestation of a spiritual reality. And that spiritual reality is a unity. We have a hard time perceiving that unity. And this is what the Kabbalist does. He's the expert at perceiving the unity that lies behind all of the variety. And the wonderful thing about this is that us, okay, we who are unschooled in the secrets of Kabbalistic thought, we also can experience what the Kabbalist is searching for. How do we do that? In some of the most mundane ways. And again, if always one of those ways is I'm sure that many of you have had the experience of having 3,523 songs on your iPhone, and you're thinking, wow, I'd really like to hear that song, okay? And that song pops right up. Or thinking about someone you haven't thought of in years and have them get in touch with you. Picking up the phone to call your mom, and she's on the other end of the phone already. Any kind of thing like that, okay, well, have you had experiences like that? Give me a good one. Give me a story. Are you all muted? You are? Oh my God. No wonder you're not talking.
I'm sorry, I missed what you had said to begin with. What was the lead into that question? Oh, now you're muted.
Yeah.
Okay, there you.
There we go. All right. We have perceptions of the underlying unity of the universe, and sometimes when we find things happen that are completely unexpected, when we find that things come together, that we have events that are juxtaposed in time in a way that doesn't seem particularly causal. When we meet somebody who we just thought about, or hear a song that we were just thinking about. Have you had experiences like that?
I'm sure everybody has, where you thought about somebody and all of a sudden they call you.
Can you think of something very unusual that happened to you?
I don't consider that unusual. I always say, that's so interesting. I mean, unusual, I don't know if that's the word I would use, but I say, what? Well, what the hell? Look at that. I was just thinking about you and you called me.
Right. Okay. Anything,
I guess I think of it as.
I remember a situation where I was teaching in Svat, okay, a bunch of eighth graders, and there were teachers there, also some parents there, and I was teaching about Kabbalah. And after the lesson was over, a woman came up to me and said, "Listen, my father's aunt fought here in Svat in 1948, and she was killed here in the war in 1948. And he asked if we might be able to find her grave. Well, the cemetery of Svat is a complete mess. All right." So I told her, if you'd written this 3 months ago, we could have got in touch with the authorities. Maybe we could have found it. But like right now, it's virtually impossible. But as long as we're here, let's take a look. So we're looking around, and we find that we're actually we're in the part of the cemetery, which is the military cemetery. And we find we're actually in a part of the military cemetery of people who died in 1948. It turned out that the grave that we were looking for was about 2 or 3 meters away from us the entire time. That was amazing. So she put her arm around her son. We took a picture of her. I was reading the tombstone and they were doing this, and I said, "Oh my God, you'll never get, it's an amazing thing. Today is her yard site." And I kept on reading. I said, "No, it's even more amazing than that." Okay. I said, "Not only is it her yard site according to the Hebrew calendar, it's also her yard site according to the Gregorian calendar. It happens once every 19 years. So it was a military grave. And on the side of the military grave, there's like this little aluminum box where you put in a candle on the yard site. And I said, it's a shame we don't have a candle to put in there today." And so the woman looked at me really strangely, and she she put her hand inside of her bag, and she took out a candle. We had been staying for Shabbat in a place in Jerusalem. It was a Sunday morning. We left to go to Svat, and there were some leftover Shabbos candles on the table. And she, not thinking, picked one up and put one inside of her bag. Now,
That is amazing.
It is amazing.
It's like it's more than one thing. It's a series of things.
A series of things strung together, which created something which was completely out of the normal. And things happen like that all the time. Another story, this was also a really, really crazy story. There were 2 guys who were on the program from Philadelphia, the Akiva school, the barrack school nowadays. And as they were getting to the cab to go to their uncle in the Tanya for Shabbat, one turns to the other and says, "I haven't talked to my dad in a long time. I really should call him. I'll call him after Shabbat." So they go to the Tanya for Shabbat. They're in a cab on the way back. The cab driver's phone rings, all right, and he puts it on the intercom. He starts talking on the phone. The kid in the back seat turns to his friend and says, "He's talking to my dad. That's my dad." All right. So he leans forward and he says, "Dad?" And his son says, "Michael." Okay. And it was his dad who was on the other end of the phone. It turns out that the cab driver and this guy's father were roommates when the father was in junior year abroad at Hebrew University. And they kept in touch. The guy in America would call like once a year to say hello. And he called when the son was in the back seat of the cab.
That's incredible. It's also 6 degrees of separation, concept.
So what do we call things like that?
Coincidence?
Coincidence. What does coincidence mean?
Things just happen.
By chance?
like
Co,
Bashert.
That's what us ordinary people say.
right, Bashert, the chance, yeah.
Bashert,
Coincidence means
meant to be.
two things that happen, okay, at the same time. Coincidence, two things that are juxtaposed in time that don't seem to have a causal relation. It wasn't because that we were going to spot that she picked up a candle, or it wasn't because we picked up a candle that it was her husband's aunt's yard site. It wasn't because the kid got in the car and said, I really have to talk to my dad, that his dad called the taxi driver who happened to be his roommate at Hebrew University 25 years ago. We don't understand these things, okay? But these things are strung together sometimes in ways that simply do not seem as if they're part of the world that we normally walk in. What a Kabbalist would say is that what we're experiencing here is a breakthrough into our reality of the underlying reality of the oneness of the universe. And it's not the heart of the thing to imagine that if the universe is all created with the oneness, that sometimes that oneness will break out. How would a physicist deal with it? How would a physicist look at this? A physicist would say, obviously, this is entanglement, all right? Have you ever heard of the concept of entanglement? It's an amazing idea. It's almost like something from the Far East. Entanglement says, and this is a concept in quantum physics, that two quantities of energy or mass that are correlated at any one point in time or space are correlated forever, over time and over space. That sounds like Kabbalah. All right. So what a physicist might say is that when you experience something like this, maybe perhaps what you're really experiencing is an aspect of quantum entanglement between energies that were entangled at one place at one time and now find themselves entangled again at another place at another time. And it shouldn't be strange to us that Kabbalah and quantum physics are addressing the same type of phenomena that we see, because both quantum physics and Kabbalah are aspects of trying to describe what we see before us. And what we see before us, like Kabbalah will say this, science will say this, science doesn't have all the answers. Science, where we live in a world which is, as I said, it's a world which is really wondrous, in which there's more that we don't understand, we do understand. I know, like Carl Sagan, if you ever saw his shows like way back when, was talking about how we've pinned down almost everything. We know almost everything, but we don't know almost everything about the universe. Like if we look at the world around us, all the world we have here, and then we include the moon, and we include all the planets, and we can include the sun, and we include the billions of stars in our galaxy, and we include the billions of galaxies in our universe, all of that, according to the astrophysicists, makes up about 6% of the mass of the universe. 6%. All of everything out there that we can possibly see makes up 6% of the mass of the universe. Okay, so where's the other 94%? Well, a good part of it is made up of something called dark matter. What's dark matter? No one knows. No one's ever seen it. We've never measured it. We have no idea what its physical properties are. The other part of it is dark energy. Ditto there. We don't know what it is. We've never measured it. We've never observed it. But according to our model of how the universe is put together, of what we see out there, we have to assume that these things exist to make the universe look the way that we see it. And it's not even things that are like way out there. You think of something like magnetism. Magnetism is something that we use every day. Yeah, we do. How much do we really know about magnetism? Very little. We don't even know where magnetism comes from. We assume that beneath the earth, beneath the mantle, there's a layer of molten iron which is spinning and giving us a magnetic field in this world. That's never been observed. Do we know why the magnetic pole has changed several times during the existence of the Earth? No. What would it feel like right now to us if the magnetic pole actually shifted from north to south and south to north? No idea. But if without that magnetic field surrounding the Earth, cosmic rays would come in and rip our DNA apart, and we look even weirder than we do already. All right. So there's a lot of the world that we don't understand. And we give ourselves explanations, which if you listen to them, if you look at them, they're based sometimes on emunah, on faith. They're based sometimes on seeing something before us and trying to imagine explanations that's going to give us that result. And that's not much different than religion. I have a lot to say on that. I'm not going to spend much time. I'm not going to spend any time on it now. But there's a lot to be learned in that area, because it's fascinating to see the how Kabbalah and science, and there are a lot of books written on this, how Kabbalah and science fit together and are often talking about the same thing. Now, one thing that Kabbalah is doing, and has been talking about it from the very beginning, is showing us the aspects of the universe which are wondrous. But that's not the only thing that Kabbalah shows us, because sometimes the world is less than wondrous. Sometimes the world is Monday morning with no coffee and a cat threw up on the sofa. Sometimes the world is October 7th. Sometimes the world is what last night after Shabbat, and looking on the news right away and seeing that the soldiers in the Israeli army had mistakenly killed 3 hostages that were trying to get out of there and give and come over to the Israeli side. Sometimes the world is earthquakes in Turkey, tsunamis in the Far East, children getting cancer. And the Kabbalist also has to deal with that aspect of the world also. A little aside, like, where do these Kabbalists come from, and where does Kabbalah come from historically? And you'll see that it's coming from a place which is sometimes much less wondrous than it is tragic. According to traditions that we really don't have any idea about of their reliability, the major work of Kabbalah, which is called the Zohar, which is a Kabbalistic mystical interpretation of the Tanakh, was written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was a student of Rabbi Akiva, who had his skin combed off of him by the Romans after the Bar Kokhba revolt. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai himself suffered terribly at the hands of the Romans. And we're talking about a period of time when the Jews were the Jews were being exiled at the beginning of a 2,000-year exile from the land of Israel by the Romans after the Bar Kokhba revolt. The Kabbalists that we know most about are Jews, Spanish Jews, who lived in the 13th and 14th and 15th century in Spain, who thought they had the most wonderful Jewish community that ever existed. And they were the kind of Jews, they had the kind of an approach to Kabbalah where they're trying to figure out when the end of days is going to come. When is this end of our suffering on earth going to come? When is the Mashiach going to come? All right. And through a very in-depth look at Jewish text and their interpretations of it, they came to the idea that their exile would end in the year 1492. Guess what happened in the year 1492? Their exile ended, but not because the Messiah came, but because they were expelled from Spain. They were stripped, they were robbed, they were kicked out of the country. They could convert. If they didn't convert, they had to leave, and they didn't leave and didn't convert, they were murdered by the thousands. A really horrendous story. And some of those Jews left Spain. Some settled in Amsterdam and started a beautiful Jewish community there. Some went to Italy, some went to Salonika, some went to North Africa. Some were captured by pirates in the Mediterranean and sold as slaves in the slave markets of North Africa. And some few of them made it to the mountain village of Sfat in Eretz Yisrael. And there they found a community which was just absolutely beautiful. A small community, a community based upon chesed and loving kindness, a community surrounded by, if you've been to Sfat, you know what I'm talking about. It's even nowadays, though it has grown and become quite an urban center, you can walk in the old city of Sfat and really feel the sense of atmosphere that must have been there in the 1500s when the Jews who were escaping the exile from Spain came and settled there. and brought their type of Kabbalah with them. And they met the Jews of Sfat who had a different type of Kabbalah altogether. Rather than trying to bring us to the end of days, the Jews who were living in Sfat in that time were instead trying to bring us to the beginning of days. They were trying to reestablish the type of intimacy and relationship between human beings and God that existed in the Garden of Eden. So it was a different approach to Kabbalah altogether, and it was in this atmosphere of really the beauty and the learning and the chesed that was going on in Sfat that you have the greatest Kabbalist of all time, a man by the name of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, nicknamed the Ha'ari, the Holy Lion, who really takes the ideas of Kabbalah, and you'll hear it, okay? What he's actually able to do is to combine the ideas of Kabbalah that were developed in Spain, of trying to bring us to the end of days, and the kind of Kabbalah that was being developed in Sfat, of trying to return us to the beginning of days, okay? And make from that a way of understanding the world in a whole new way. And particularly, he has to address exactly what I was talking about before, not just the wondrous parts of the world, but the tragic aspects of the world as well, not just the good, but also the evil. Now, the thing about Ha'ari is that he was first of all, he died very young. He died in his 30s. He lived very quickly. He only lived in Sfat for 3 years, but there's no person whose name is more associated with the city of Sfat than Ha'ari, Rav Yitzchak Luria. He had what we call in Zen a beginner's mind. A beginner's mind is somebody who can come to a problem without all of the assumptions that we normally bring to addressing what the problem is all about. A great example of a beginner's mind is Einstein. All right, Einstein's one of his major accomplishments was the not the general rule of relativity, but the specific rule of relativity, having to do with
Theory.
One of the theories of relativity.
Theory of relativity.
There is the theory of relativity. His idea was this: is that nothing can go faster than the speed of light. I mean, they already knew that nothing can go faster than the speed of light. But what interested Einstein was a thought experiment. And it's the kind of experiment you'd expect somebody who, I don't know, it's a good high school question, okay? If nothing travels faster than the speed of light, right? And you're traveling at the speed of light, and you're holding in your hand a shaving mirror, right? So when you get to the speed of light, does the reflection in your mirror disappear? Because to get to the mirror, the light from your face would have to travel faster than the speed of light to be reflected back to your face. So his theoretical question was, does your reflection in the mirror disappear if you're traveling at the speed of light? What's the answer to the question? Any budding scientists there?
Yes, it would. I would assume so.
You would think so, but in fact, it doesn't. Okay, why doesn't it? Because for any moving frame of reference, the speed of light is the same. The same thing if you're on a plane that's traveling 600 miles an hour and you throw a ball up in the air, it's not going to go backwards at 600 miles an hour. It's traveling with you in the same frame of reference. The same thing with a person traveling at the speed of light holding a mirror. Okay, everything is. What's that?
You're still traveling at the speed of light.
Everything with you is traveling in the same frame of reference. Okay, so that everything is basically like if you're on sometimes like you're on a train or a subway and the train next to you is moving, or sometimes you don't know whether that train is moving or whether you're moving. You can't feel anything. Okay, so you don't know what exactly is the frame of reference. The same thing going for the person traveling at the speed of light. He is creating his own frame of reference so that the speed of light is the same for him as for anybody else. And again, it was a tremendous insight, which will lead to the theory of relativity. But only somebody with that kind of a mind who can think past assumptions would be able to get there. Ha'ari was the same kind of person. He was able to ask questions that were very, very simple and yet very penetrating. And the question that he asked, all right, which is a question that we all know the answer to. It's like one of those Sunday school questions, which is, where is God? Where's Hashem? And the answer to the question is
Everywhere.
everywhere. Okay. God is everywhere. He's up, he's down, he's all around. God is everywhere. If you think about that answer to the question, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense because God is completely non-physical and we live in a physical world. God is not a tree. God is not a mountain. God is not people. Okay. All these things may have a manifestation of God inside of them, but none of those things are God. So how can we understand what God really is? God is completely outside this world. And he develops an idea of the creation of the world, which is going to include that. Listen to what he does here, okay? Ha'ari says that at one point in time long ago, the presence of God filled the entire universe. There was nothing but the presence of God. It filled everything. So he wants to create a physical universe, a physical world. What does he do? He has to go into exile. Just like Ha'ari went into exile, just like all the Jews went into exile. He is now applying the experience of Jews in his generation to God. God has to go into exile, and God pulls back from a central point and creates an empty space. And in this empty space, God can create the physical universe. What does that mean about our physical universe? What isn't there?
God.
God. So you wonder why kids get cancer, why Holocausts happen, why planes fell out of the sky and earthquakes happen, and it's because God is not here. That's a very scary thought, that we live in a universe where God does not exist. And in fact, Ha'ari does not go there. He says what it's like is this: when God empties himself out of this part of the universe, it's like emptying oil out of a bottle. When you finish emptying oil out of a bottle, what's inside the bottle?
Nothing.
Ah, that's not true.
No.
What's inside the bottle?
Oil.
There's always
Air.
air, and there's always a layer of oil inside that bottle. It doesn't empty out entirely.
Right.
So when God empties himself out from this from this part of the universe to create our world, to create our physical universe, there's still a patina, a residue of God which is left in our universe. And it's that residue of God which is in our universe which allows us to see things like beauty and goodness and unity and love. It's that aspect of goodness in the universe that we see when we look at the physical world and see and we're left breathless by the world itself. Or we see things like coincidences that seem to be completely unnatural, completely unusual. That's the aspect of God which is left inside of our physical universe. And that's not the only thing he says. He also says that presence of God surrounds our physical universe, and there is a beam of holiness, of light that comes from God that hits our physical universe. But our physical universe is not strong enough to contain the energy of God. And so the energy of God splits. It splits into what we call spherot. So this is where we would have a slide, okay? And you get the picture of the tree of life with all the different, and I'm sure you've all seen the Kabbalistic tree of life, all the circles connected by lines, and the circles inside the tree of life all represent different aspects like insight and understanding and knowledge and heroism and royalty and chesed and goodness, okay? And where are all these things found in our world? Inside of us. Right? So one aspect of holiness in our world is something which is physical, the residue of God, which is left over from the works of creation. And the other aspect of holiness in our world are the aspects of godliness that are found inside of ourselves. And the work of the Kabbalist actually is to take those broken, those little pieces of goodness that we can find inside of ourselves and connect them with the goodness in other people. And create an energy which then connects to the residue of God which exists in our physical universe. And that creates the oneness. And you can see how Ha'ari, in a beautiful literary way, is going to draw from his own experience of exile and his own experience of his generation of tragedy and of a type of a Kabbalah which is focused on the end of things, and joins it together with the Kabbalah of Sfat, which is bringing us back to a unity, to a oneness, and creates something which is really, really unique. And I think like the greatest symbol of what he does here, okay, is if you take a beam of white light and you project it into a prism, what do you get? You get the cover of Pink Floyd's album, okay? You get the spectrum. Okay, but what happens if you project that spectrum back into another prism? What comes out the other side? Five points,
It's white light, nothing.
white light. Okay, the second prism recombines the colors of the spectrum back into a white light. That would be that's another slide. Okay, and you can see it. You can Google it and you can see it very, very clearly that once you project that spectrum back into the second prism, it recombines. And that's what the Kabbalist is. The Kabbalist is like a second prism. What the Kabbalist is here to do is to try to find all the different variety of holiness that exist in our physical universe and to combine them back together into the original white light. It's really a beautiful idea. And I have a fondness for that, okay? There's two other things I want to talk about having to do with physics that I think are very important, and I think tell us very important things about how Kabbalah and quantum physics sees our relationship with the physical universe. It's impossible to talk about quantum physics without talking about the double slit experiment, okay? I already see people smiling because they've heard this before, all right, or studied this before. But it's really an amazing thing. And Richard Feynman, who happened to be like the greatest teacher of quantum physics in the last century, said that if you understand the double slit experiment, you've understood about 98% of what quantum physics comes to teach. The only problem is that no one really understands the double slit experiment. All right, the double slit experiment starts with the idea of light. All right, so is light a particle or is light a wave? First of all, there are two different things in the universe. One of them are particles and one of them are waves, okay? Particles are like little pieces of matter, okay, that are in one place at one time, all right? And waves are kind of like spread out kind of things. Particles don't go around corners so much. Sound waves do. Even water waves do. So we have these two different phenomena in our world. And the thing is that the people were asking back in the 18th and 19th century, is light a wave or is light a particle? Newton thought it was a particle. He was fairly convinced it was a particle. And it wasn't until there was a physicist by the name of Young in the 1800s who showed that, in fact, light can behave like a wave. What did he do? Actually, I think he had a hole in his shade in his room that let in a beam of light. And he had the beam of light project onto a piece of cardboard. And he put a hole, a slit into the cardboard, one slit, and he looked on the wall to see what it looked like, okay? And it looked like a fuzzy ball of light, all right? And then he put another slit next to it, and here you would expect to see two fuzzy balls of light. But that's not what he saw. What he saw was a pattern of light and dark and light and dark and light and dark. Of course, it's called an interference pattern or refraction pattern. What it's like is this: if you toss a pebble into a pool of water, you get a pattern of ripples. All right. If you toss in two pebbles into a pond of water, you get two sets of ripples that interact with each other, interfere with each other. If you have two waves, it'll make one larger wave, or a wave in a trough, it'll be flat, or two troughs will be much lower. And if you map the intensity on the side of the pond, you'll get a pattern of high intensity, low intensity, high intensity, low intensity. Is an interference pattern exactly like the pattern of light and dark that Young found when he had the light go through two slits. And it showed that in fact the light is a wave, and those waves interfere with each other, and that's what's causing the interference pattern on his wall. All right. So at that point, everyone was convinced that light was a wave. So far, so good? Good. I see heads nodding. Good. All right. Okay, so that's the way it was until Einstein comes around in 1904. And in 1904, Einstein conducted an experiment where he used light to knock particles of metal off of a plate or something. I don't know, but he was using light as if it were made up of particles and not of waves. And in fact, he was even able to create particles of light that are called photons. All right. So then some enterprising physicists said, well, what if we run that double slit experiment? Rather than using light waves coming from the sun, what if we use particles of light coming from a photon gun? All right. So here we have our photon gun. We have this is another slide. Okay. A piece of cardboard. And we have a photographic plate to add up all the little photons of light. So you have one slit open and you shoot photon, lots of photons. Okay, it goes through the one slit and builds up on the photographic plate, and what it looks like is in fact a fuzzy ball of light, just like if it were waves. Okay, the same thing. All right. Now you open up two slits and you shoot photon. Okay, you can even, and what you end up here, and you should end up here, because you're not using waves, you're using photons, using particles, not wavy things that interfere with each other, but little balls of matter. Okay, little balls of light that don't interfere. But the interesting thing is that when you develop the photographic plate, what you end up with is the same kind of interference pattern as if you were using particles. Now, I know this might be a little confusing, but it's an amazing thing that you're using particles and ending up with a result that is as if you were using waves. And waves and particles are two different things entirely. Well, physicists are pretty crafty people. So they decide, listen, maybe what's happening here is that the photons are going through both slits at the same time, and they're interfering with each other, and then leaving an interference pattern on the photographic plate. So they just shot one photon at a time. Even shooting one photon at a time, you still get an interference pattern. They said, hold on, that if we're shooting one photon at a time, it can't be going through both slits, could it? So they put a detector at the slits to figure out if the photon was going through one slit or the other slit, or maybe the photon splits in two and goes through both slits. All right. What they found out was two things. What they found is that the photon actually only goes through one slit. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual is that when you put the detectors at the slits, the interference pattern goes away, and you get two fuzzy balls of light as if you're dealing with particles. Okay, just like you should. Now, if you don't understand everything with that experiment, that's fine. The take-home lesson on this experiment is this. All right. The way we observe an experiment has a direct impact upon the experiment itself. I'm going to say it again, it's such an important point. It's not as if there is a pane of glass that separates us from physical reality. We're part of physical reality. We're part of the experiment. Okay. The way we conduct the experiment, the way we observe if we choose to look at it or not look at it, is going to have a direct effect upon the result of the experiment itself. We're not observers of the world, my friends. We are part of the world. We live inside the world. And by living inside the world, by observing, by interacting with each other, we're actually determining a reality in the world. Sometimes that's hard to see, but I think that's one of the most important ideas of quantum physics, is that, and I think that's something which I think is very pronounced in Judaism also, that when it says that a person who kills another human being is as if they've destroyed an entire universe. because that person has a very unique way of looking at the universe, of looking at the world, and it has a unique way of influencing the world and building the world. And a person who saves another human being is someone who's saved an entire universe, so that that person's universe can go on existing in this world and affecting our reality. One of the very last things I want to talk about is it has to do with a question that my daughter asked me when she was 13 years old. And it was such a brilliant question. And like a week later, I read the answer in a book. So, as you know, nothing goes faster than the speed of light. All right. And the closer you get to the speed of light, what happens to time?
It slows down.
Slows down.
Slows down.
At the speed of light, Cale, what happens to time?
It stops.
It stops. Okay. Now, the closest star to us, other than the sun, is Alpha Centauri. It's 3.5 light years away. So how long does it take light to get from Alpha Centauri to us?
3.5 years.
3.5 years. From our perspective, from the perspective of the light itself, how long does it take to get from Alpha Centauri to here?
No tell.
No time at all. For the photon that's traveling from Alpha Centauri to here, it's traveling at the speed of light, which means that it's existing outside of time. Which means that for the photon of light itself is instantaneously at Alpha Centauri and here. Either time doesn't exist or space doesn't exist, but since space-time is one fabric of its own, if one doesn't exist, the other doesn't exist. When we think about what that means to ourselves, I mean, we have a piece of paper here, which is two-dimensional, okay? When we turn it like this, okay, it's basically one-dimensional, all right? We live in a universe which is four-dimensional, which has 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. But there are dimensions of existence that go beyond 4 dimensions. And when we talk about how a particle of light can simultaneously be 3.5 light years away and also here, then we realize that in fact, when we're talking about the unity that it describes our physical reality, we see that light is probably one of the best metaphors we can use for understanding how our universe is actually constructed. And in fact, this universe is a single thing, okay? From our perception, it's different because we don't live at the speed of light. But there's an aspect of the universe in which everything indeed is one. One last little story. And this is a story that has to do with Ha'ari again, with the Kabbalist of Sfat. There were 2 other Kabbalists who lived at the same time. One was called Moshe Cordovero, who was a brilliant explainer of Kabbalah. And another one was Rabbi Yosef Karo, who was probably one of the greatest experts in Jewish law, which you would think means he wouldn't be a mystic, but he was also a mystic. One time Ha'ari was in his yeshiva studying, and his head popped up, and he shouted to his students, "Go and bring me Rabbi Moshe Cordovero right now, and Rabbi Yosef Karo. Bring them to me right now." They go to Moshe Cordovero's house. They bring the rabbi there. They go to Rabbi Yosef Karo's house, and he had just died. So they return to Ha'ari, and they tell him, and Ha'ari burst into tears. And his students ask him, "Why? Why are you crying?" And he said, "Because I had this idea that if I stood on the shoulders of Rabbi Moshe Cordovero and he stood on the shoulders of Rabbi Yosef Karo, that would be able to reach up and bring down the Mashiach." Now, obviously, he doesn't mean that literally, okay? But what he's meaning is that, yes, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero and Rabbi Yosef Karo had different ideas than Ha'ari, very, very different ideas. But in that time and in that place, rather than having different ideas that conflicted with each other, they were building each other. How important a message that is for us in our day, when oftentimes interreligious politics between Reform and Conservative and Orthodox get in our way, or when politics stand in our way. And rather than building each other up and joining our energies together to make something which is beautiful and light and meaningful, so much of the time of people seems to be spent in tearing down and destroying. So especially in these times when we're going through the war here in Israel and there's so much anti-Semitism in the States, it's very important that we are looking at each other and deeply, finding the holiness in each other and building each other up and building up our community. I think the symbol of that is the Havdalah candle, which Sfat is famous for because of the candle factory there, which rather than just being like a single pure light that each of us in our own way happen to be, but rather when you have all those wicks bound together, it creates a type of a light which is dancing and beautiful and magical and sending out sparks, please God, throughout the Jewish world and throughout time and throughout space. That's about all I got to say about that.